Let's talk about Radagast Wizard of Wilds. This is going to be a $50 budget for this deck, and there's actually 3 themes built into this commander that we have with this deck. So let's talk about that real quick. We have Cascade cards, X spells, and just huge spells in general, and our commander is really going to allow us to take advantage of that. So let's talk about Radagast. For only 4 mana, we get a 3/5 with Ward 1. Beast and birds we control have Ward 1 as well. But the thing I really care about is whenever we cast a spell with mana value 5 or greater, we get to choose one of these. Create a 3/3 green beast creature token or create a 2/2 blue bird with flying. So let's jump into the ramp, because this is going to be the boring part. We have Arcane Signet, Commander's Sphere, and Mind Stone. For a few of the mana rocks that we have, we pay mana to get these and we can tap them to get mana back. Arcane Signet and Commander's Sphere give us colored mana, and Mind Stone gives us colorless mana. How we can actually get lands onto the battlefield, we have cards like Cultivate, Farhaven Elf, and Grow from the Ashes. These bring lands from our library onto the battlefield, but how we can actually trigger our commander with ramp are cards like Dreamstone Hedron and Nissa's Renewal. These are cards that help us ramp, and their mana value 5 or greater, which gets us more tokens. Moving on to the removal. Again, another boring part, but we'll just go over this very quickly. We have Acidic Slime, Meteor Golem, and Terastodon that are creatures that can trigger our commander because they're 5 CMC or greater. Acidic Slime helps us destroy an artifact, enchantment, or land when it enters the battlefield. It's also a 2/2 with Death Touch, which don't underestimate creatures with Death Touch, because it's going to persuade our opponents to not attack us with their huge creatures, because we're going to kill them instantly if we're able to block those creatures. Meteor Golem, when it enters the battlefield, we can destroy any non-land permanent an opponent controls. And Terastodon, we can destroy up to 3 target non-creature permanents, so we can target artifacts, enchantments, lands, anything that's not a creature, and its controller will get a 3/3 green elephant instead. Now let's talk about one of the X spells for our removal, which is Curse of the Swine. For X and 2 blue, we can exile X target creatures, and for each creature exiled this way, its controller gets a 2/2 green boar creature token. So how it works is that whenever we pay X is 3 or greater for this spell, it will trigger our commander, and we get tokens from it because it is a 5 CMC or greater spell. If we're only putting 2 into the X and this is a 4 CMC spell, it's not going to trigger our commander because it's not 5 or greater. I also want to mention Junkwinder. This has been recommended by the commander mechanic for any token deck, so I thought, why not toss it in here? It's actually very powerful, so thank you to Chris, the commander mechanic, for recommending this card for any of the token decks. So let's talk about it real quick. It's a 7 CMC card, so it's going to trigger our commander. It's a 5/6 Serpent, and it has affinity for tokens, so it costs 1 less for each token we control, and this deck is going to have a lot of tokens. Whenever a token enters the battlefield under your control, which is going to happen at least once each of our turns, we get to tap target non-land permanent an opponent controls, and it doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. This is going to allow us to swing in with all of those creatures, and they're not going to be able to be blocked, which is really sweet for this deck. Moving on to the X spells, we have Blue Sun's Twilight. So for X and 2 blue, we can gain control of target creature with mana value X or less. If X is 5 or greater, hint hint, create a token that's a copy of that creature. So we're going to trigger our commander, and we get a copy of that creature, and we get to gain control of it. There's also Gadwick the Wizened. For X and 3 blue, when it enters the battlefield, draw X cards. It's a 3/3 human wizard, and whenever we cast a blue spell, we get to tap target non-land permanent an opponent controls, which is great because tapping down their creatures is going to allow us to swing in with more of those creatures, and that's exactly how we're going to win with this deck, which we'll explain when it comes to the win cons. There's Hungering Hydra. It's X and green. It's a 0/0 Hydra. It's going to enter the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters. It can't be blocked by more than 1 creature, and when it's dealt damage, we put that many +1/+1 counters on it. This is only a 49-cent card, and this is going to be excellent for this deck. So we just put 4 into the X. We put 5 mana total into this card. We're going to get a creature token from our commander on top of it, and this can't be blocked by more than 1 creature. So definitely promoting all those counters it's going to be put on it. Mass Manipulation. We're going to have a lot of mana in this deck, so while you see that mana cost is huge, we can pay that very easily. So for X, X, and 4 blue, we can gain control of X target creatures and or planeswalkers. So if we pay at least 6 mana, we get 1 creature. If we pay at least 8 mana, we get 2 creatures and or planeswalkers, and so on and so forth. Next is Mind Spring. If we put 3 into the X, which would make it a 5 CMC card, we draw 3 cards, we trigger our commander, And of course, you can always put more into the X and draw a lot more cards. But what's great is that if you want to make this an X spells deck, you can do it. Just make sure you're always hitting that 5 CMC or greater to start triggering your commander. Now moving on to the card draw. My favorite part of any deck, we have Dawnglade Regent. CMC is a check because it's going to meet that requirement of 5 CMC or greater. When it enters the battlefield, we become the Monarch, so that means at our end step, if we are the Monarch, we get to draw a card. And as long as we're the Monarch, permanents we control have hexproof, which is great. That means we can still target our creatures, but our opponents can no longer do so. There's Dig Through Time. I know it's not necessarily a card draw spell, but for 8 mana that has Delve, which every time we exile a card from our graveyard for this, it's going to pay for 1 colorless, so we could pay 2 blue at the greatest that this card can do. We get to look at the top 7 cards of our library and put 2 of them into our hand, and the rest go on the bottom of our library in any order. This is an amazing card, and again, while it's not necessarily card draw, we can really filter through our deck. There's also Fact or Fiction, another way we're not drawing cards, but we're going to put 5 cards from the top of our library in front of one of our opponents, and they have to separate it into 2 piles. And we get to put one of those piles into our hand, the other goes into our graveyard. There's Lord of Change. This is a 7 CMC card. It's also a 6/6 with flying and ward 3. When it enters the battlefield, draw 3 cards. And then this will also trigger our commander and get us another token. There's Pull from Tomorrow. This is another X spell that I forgot to mention. We get to draw X cards and then discard 1 card. This is an amazing spell only for 46 cents. There's Rush of Knowledge. We have huge creature spells in this deck, so we get to draw cards equal to the highest converted mana cost among permanents we control. And for 5 mana, this is a great card, especially 15 cents. Great for this deck. Soul of the Harvest. When another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card. There are 32 creatures in this card, 31 minus Soul of the Harvest, so we're going to be triggering this card a lot. And it triggers our commander because it's 5 CMC or greater. Since there's a huge amount of ramp in the deck, let's talk about Tatiova Benthic Druid. This is only 21 cents. When a land enters the battlefield under your control, you gain a life, and more importantly, you draw a card. Thunderous Snapper. For 4 mana, while this doesn't trigger our commander, initially while we cast it, it says whenever you cast a converted mana cost spell, 5 or greater, we get to draw a card. And while there are more card draw spells to talk about, let's just talk about Urban Evolution, and then we'll move on to the next category. This is a 5 mana spell that will trigger our commander. We get to draw 3 cards, and we can play an additional land this turn, which increases that ramp that we're talking about, and it's going to allow us to cast bigger spells a lot easier. Let's move on to the Cascade category, which we start with Annoyed Altasaur. For 7 mana, we get a 6/5 dinosaur that has Reach and Trample. It has Cascade, so whenever we cast this, it doesn't hit the battlefield yet. We're going to start revealing cards from the top of our library until we get something 6 mana value or less, and we get to cast that for free, and if it's 5 mana value or greater, it will trigger our commander, which is amazing. I think Cascade is another great way to build a Radagast deck. There's also Imoti, Celebrant of Bounty. Whenever we cast this, it has Cascade, and whenever we cast a spell with 6 mana value or greater, that also has Cascade, so we'll be able to trigger our commander a lot with this card. There's also Maelstrom Colossus, cost us 8 mana, has Cascade, and it's a 7/7. Sakashima's Protege. It's a 3/1, and it does cost 6 mana, and it has Flash. But more importantly, it has Cascade, and whenever this enters the battlefield, it enters as a copy of any permanent that entered the battlefield this turn. So we can really take advantage. Our opponent's having a huge play, well, we can also have a huge play as well by taking whatever permanent and getting a copy of it, and hopefully get more advantage out of it than they will. There's also Sweet Gum Recluse. This is a 6 mana 0/3 spider that has Flash, Cascade, and Reach. When it enters the battlefield, we're going to put 3 +1/+1 counters on any number of target creatures that entered the battlefield this turn, which could be those tokens that we're making from our commander. Now, as you see, our commander is a huge part of this deck because we're making so many tokens from it, so we have 2 cards to help protect our commander. There's Mask of Avacyn and Mirror Shield. These are great budget artifacts to help protect your commander, and you don't have to pay $8 for Lightning Greaves. You can actually just pay 40 cents for Mask of Avacyn or 20 cents for Mirror Shield. Yes, you have to pay the additional equip cost. It's not 0 like Lightning Greaves, but we're on a budget, and so we're going to take advantage of that with playing less favored hex-proof artifacts that can help our commander be more protected outside of the Ward 1. One silly card I wanted to add in here that's not very good usually is Mind Control. This is a 5 CMC card. We get to enchant a creature, and then we get to control that enchanted creature. So we get to take something from one of our opponents for 5 mana, and this will trigger our commander. So we get a token from it as well, which I think is well worth the mana cost for this. There's also Thrix the Sudden Storm. This promotes us casting those huge spells. This is a 5 CMC card, triggers our commander, which is great, has flash, has flying, it's a 4/5, and spells with converted mana cost 5 or greater cost 1 less, which is amazing. And guess what? Now they can't be countered, which is very powerful, by the way. Now for a massive play, we have Karuga the Macro Sage. This will not be a companion in the deck. We're just focused on that second part that says, when this enters the battlefield, we'll draw a card for each other permanent you control with converted mana cost 3 or greater, which is going to be a lot of this deck because we're focused on the higher CMC side of things. So we'll get to draw a huge amount of cards from this. And the last category I want to mention is how we're going to win with this deck. And that is with overwhelming our opponents with cards like Endray's Forerunners and Giant Ankheg. So Endray's Forerunners does cost us 8 mana. It's a 7/7 boar with Vigilance, Trample, and Haste. When this enters the battlefield, each other creature you control gets +2/+2 and gains Vigilance and Trample until end of turn. And with those tokens that we're making from our commander, this can be very deadly, as well as Giant Ankheg. This is an 8/8 that costs 8 mana. It has Trample and Ward 2. It also gives our other creatures Trample and Ward 2, so more protection, and the keyword is Trample. If we're making the 3/3 beast from our commander, they don't have Trample or any kind of evasion to help them, so if we're making the birds that have 2/2 and they're flying, that will most likely get around our opponents if they don't have any flyers or any creatures with reach, which is another thing that our deck excels at. We actually have creatures with reach, so if our opponents do have flyers, we can deal with that if necessary. I would like to give a shout out to Jen from the Filthy MTG Casuals on Twitter, as well as LotusbloomMTG from Twitter. I'm going to have their Twitter links in the description down below if you want to check them out. I got the idea of building this deck from Jen, and we confirmed from Lotus Bloom cards that are X spells with 5 CMC or greater. For example, if the total CMC when we put in the X mana is 5 or greater, that's going to trigger our commander. So I want to thank both of them for helping me get the idea to make this deck and to confirm that X spells are possible for this deck. If you would like to purchase this deck, it will be in the description down below. Again, $50 for this deck, and if you want to purchase the commander, it would have to be on a pre-order because the Lord of the Rings set has not come out yet. And thank you to the members who help support this show. You can also become a member for 99 cents each month just by hitting that join button down below, and you can see your name at the end of these videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.